Hi, this is Ben Kinchlow. I want to welcome you to a special edition of the 700 Club. This year, you've seen it everywhere, the sign of the X. But what does it really mean? Well, today we'll attempt to answer that question as we look at the man and the myth of Malcolm X, right after this report from CBN News Desk. Stay tuned.
The 700 Club presents a major television event, a fascinating examination of the controversy and the truth about Malcolm X. X, in search of the truth, with your host, Ben Kinchlow.
Malcolm X, a name and a man who inspires strong emotion. It's almost impossible to be neutral about Malcolm X. You either loved him or you hated him. But one thing you must remember is that Malcolm X was a product of his times, and that Malcolm's lifestyle reduced him, by his own admission, to a functionally illiterate gangster and drug addict. He was later called Satan by his fellow prison inmates because of his evil temperament. But Malcolm X became an example of what can be accomplished by virtue of hard work, commitment, and dedication to a cause. Now, whether you agree or disagree with Malcolm X, don't let his personal achievements be obscured by his rhetoric, much of which he later admitted was not his own. During this special program, we'll take a look at Malcolm X through the eyes of some who knew him, some who've only heard about him, and others who remember the man they thought he was. But first, let's take a look at what's happening in the 90s with the phenomenon of Malcolm X.
1992 is dubbed the Year of X. For over a year, many retailers have stocked books, X hats, shirts, and just about anything relating to Malcolm X in anticipation of Spike Lee's movie on the slain black Muslim leader. Because of the hype surrounding the movie, the X has become a moneymaker. It can be found on everything imaginable, including air fresheners and potato chips. Some feel this mass merchandising has turned Malcolm X and his message into the latest fad.
To me, people don't understand what they're wearing. I mean, they just see this shirt or a hat or a jacket in the store and it's, oh, this is real nice. I like the colors and it looks nice with my sneakers, so that's why they buy it. But they don't really understand what they're wearing.
But the movie has generated some serious interest in Malcolm X. Various news articles and groups continually discuss the man and his message. Some believe the movie will give more people a better understanding of Malcolm X.
I believe the movie will spark a lot of people also to read the book and to gain more knowledge about the man.
With the popularity of the movie and the abundance of merchandise and information, Malcolm X is once again at the forefront of society's attention. But do we know who Malcolm X was or what he believed?
All I know is that he's just like a real social figure to black people.
He was very violent. Not violence in the sense that he would go out and just kill somebody, but violence in the sense that he was an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of guy.
It appears that commercialism sometimes overshadows the facts and reduces Malcolm X to a few buzzwords and catchphrases. But to understand Malcolm X and the message he preached, we must get beyond the trinkets and clothes and take a closer look at the man.
And our purpose in this special is to get beyond the hype and find out, if we can, just who Malcolm X was. As you've seen, there's been much anticipation over the movie Malcolm X, and it's been building for months. In fact, many people have speculated that the movie might give rise to violence after the film. But the question now is, did the film deliver, and what was its message? Let's take a look.
What's your name? Malcolm Little. No. That's the name of the slave masters who own your family. You don't even know who you are.
It is a film that has promised to inspire and electrify its audience. The controversial character of Malcolm X, portrayed in Spike Lee's latest movie, is revealed over the span of several decades, with major changes in his motives, lifestyle, and convictions. And while many young people eagerly awaited the opening of the film on November 18th, it was obvious on the 17th that the film's exposition about Malcolm's life would set a lot of things straight.
I believe what he believed was right, but a lot of people misinterpreted a lot of what he was saying.
He started as an ex-convict, is where they get the name Malcolm X from. And he also had a slave name by Malcolm Shabazz or something like that.
I don't know too much about Malcolm X. That's why I want to see the movie to learn a little more about it.
The PG rating of Malcolm X lives up to its claim with very little profanity and no nudity whatsoever, partly because of a desire for young people to see the film and partly it would seem out of respect for what Malcolm represents. The $33 million film genuinely concerns itself with the transitions of Malcolm, played brilliantly by Denzel Washington, from street hustler and professional thief to an angry, incarcerated man, then to a devout Muslim who has committed his life to the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Your assignment is to build temples all over this nation. More work than you've ever done in your life.
Yes, sir.
You will be in the public eye.
It really was a volatile, very emotional time. I think it places a heavy burden on any filmmaker to try to recreate all that ambiance. I think Spike did a fairly decent job with that, but maybe not enough.
Dr. Betty Shabazz, widow of Malcolm X, feels Spike's film was a very necessary one in broadening our minds from a domestic to an international scope. Nevertheless, she wishes the closing moments of the film could have represented more of the strength and focus her husband exhibited to the end.
Arthur Davis, in his eulogy, says, "Unconquered still." And he was unconquered. He wasn't totally and completely disillusioned, so that he wouldn't walk around dazed and dizzy and not know exactly which way to go, kind of confused.
The final phase of Malcolm's transition is dramatically seen in his trip to Mecca. This spiritual journey and the importance of its impact, while well noted, is clouded by the long death watch, an implication of the Nation of Islam's involvement in Malcolm's assassination. Author and critic Amiri Baraka disagrees with Spike's accusations against the Nation of Islam and is not very happy with the rest of the film either.
You know, I said he would focus on the whole, dope, pimp, prostitute section. I knew he would, like, balderize and leave out the revolutionary aspect. Spike is a misinformed, unserious, dangerous opportunist. He has nothing to do with revolution. He pimps revolution. You understand what I mean? He pimps it like it was a whore.
William Kunstler, who played the judge that sentences Malcolm in the movie, disagrees.
Well, you have to do that in a movie. I don't think you can really, even if it's 3 hours and 21 minutes long, that you can really get the whole philosophy of a man. I think you do have to flatten it out somewhat and get it across. Otherwise, I think it becomes an impossible task.
Whether the film details Malcolm's life as diligently as Baraka would wish, there's no question that the film has a profound effect on its viewers.
I think it was warm, and I think it moved you. I was very sad at the end. I could identify with his wife and with the people who had grown to love him.
I really admired after he went to Mecca, and he saw the brotherhood between black and white. And that, see, this ignorance only exists in America. You know what I'm saying? And you go other places, other countries, and brothers will accept you as you are.
Joining us now is to discuss the film Malcolm X is an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker. He's now working with a major corporation in Cincinnati. His work has been compared to Spike Lee's. He's here. Please welcome from Cincinnati, Ohio, Mr. Alfonso Wesson. Alfonso, delighted to have you. All right. Good to see you, man. Hey, question. Why did the film have to be made, or did it have to be made?
I think the film most definitely had to be made, Ben, if for nothing else, to show the broad populace of America that African Americans do not exist in a monolith. It's a very big perception to think that all African Americans think the same way, view things the same way. I've run into many people who say, well, Jesse Jackson, that's your spokesperson, right? Well, no, not necessarily. Well, Malcolm X is your spokesperson, right? Well, no, not necessarily. We need to let it be known that there are different ideologies out here in terms of nationalism, internationalism, the perspective on black life, and the more positive and strong black images we can get on the screen, the better. We have been denied our history so long, so it is very good now to see our history come full-blown on the screen.
So when you look at the message, what would you say? Filmmakers, when you produce a film, you produce it with a message in mind.
Most definitely.
What was the message of the film, you think?
I think the message of well, you would have to really get into the mind of Spike.
What was the message that came across from the filmmaker's point of view?
the message that came across from the filmmaker's point of view, from where I was sitting, was the strength of Malcolm, what Malcolm stood for. But we have to look at the times that this film was made in. It's a sad commentary on society that what Malcolm is preaching in the film back in the 60s, 20 years ago and what have you, is still applicable today. That's the sad commentary on society. And the film could have been made, not, should the film have been made, but isn't it a sad commentary on society that the film was made and it's still relevant? The things that Malcolm was speaking of then still apply now, and that's the sad commentary.
The opening credits, the beating in
Right.
L.A. and the
Right.
flag burning to form the X, was that some symbolic message there?
Oh, most definitely. The flag burning to form the X was powerful for twofold reason. Number one, Malcolm is a product of America. The flag burning into the X. Malcolm is a product of America. Number two, the burning of the flag is a very controversial thing. We know how people get all riled up when the flag is burned. Malcolm was willing to challenge the system that is America, the flag being representative of America, and burn into America's consciousness the inequities, the inequities that exist in society. And that's pretty much, I thought, what the flag was symbolic of. It was really a riveting symbol when I saw it in the theater. The audience responded like, my goodness.
Speaking of riveting scenes,
yes.
There's one particular point in the movie, probably one of the most powerful points in the movie.
Particularly for African-American males.
We want you to take a look at this and find out why and what the power of it is.
I suggest you look outside that window.
You've been laying down and bowing down for 400 years. I think it's time to stand up.
All right, break it up. You got what you wanted.
No, I'm not satisfied.
That's too much power for one man to have.
Now, you were watching this in an inner city movie.
I was in the hood.
In the hood.
I was in the hood seeing this in the middle of a Cincinnati housing projects, and to see the reaction.
What was the reaction?
The place went up for grabs, literally. All the brothers stood up and said, right on, go on, Malcolm, go on, man. The showing of that kind of power, of seeing Malcolm exhibit that kind of power, of seeing that kind of unity among African-American men struck a chord. That's something they want to buy into. Why do we have gangs in the inner city? Because they need something to buy into. When the dominant culture locks you out, you have to have some culture that you can call your own and measure yourself by. And here they were seeing a culture, the Muslim culture, exhibit power and be able to march on authority, the police station, have their demands heard, have their demands met, and leave when they were ready to leave, and exhibit a great power and a great unity. And that's something that's being cried out for in the inner city, and it struck a resonant chord.
Is that why you think so many people have said that Malcolm is symbolic of the black male in America?
He's symbolic of some of the black men in America. I don't want to, make a broad generalization. He's a symbolic of some. But it still goes back to the fact that his message is still relevant. And what he was saying and the things he said would come to pass are coming to pass now. And that's why people are embracing him all over again. It's like what he said was true and what he stood for. The fascinating thing about Malcolm is that so many different sects can embrace him. Black conservatives can embrace him for his do for self preaching, where he preached about, do for self. Don't beg society for anything, do for yourself. And then you have those who might be a little bit more liberal. They could embrace Malcolm because Malcolm could also look at dominant society and say, woe be it unto you for what you have done to my people. So, you have two different sects who are like on opposite ends of each other, It's like getting Clarence Thomas and Jesse together, on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Well, coming up as we continue our look here at the special look, a poignant look at the real Malcolm X. Plus, we'll meet a man who was Malcolm X's former bodyguard. He was there when Malcolm was gunned down. We'll talk to him when we come back.
Some people feel like with the riots and everything breaking out, that racism is going to come back. I feel that it is, and it may be sooner than we think. And I think that the Malcolm X film is going to be another awakening.
We've just seen how today's pop culture, the movies, portray Malcolm X, but is that the real Malcolm X? Where did he come from? What did he really believe, and what did he stand for? CBN News reporter Dale Hurd now reports on the man known as Malcolm X.
He didn't think about turning the other cheek. If you spit on him, you just spit back on.
X. It is a symbol for the unknown, the forgotten heritage of a people stripped of their original names and culture. But who is the man who brought the X to prominence? Who is the man behind the X?
Malcolm X was a revolutionary.
He was moderate in almost everything.
He was an articulator of black rage.
He meant new enthusiasm.
He was changing. He was evolving all the time. Malcolm went through many, many transformations, and clearly, well, not clearly, but it is possible that that's the reason for his demise.
He was born Malcolm Little, the seventh child of a Baptist preacher and Marcus Garvey follower. Garvey was the 1920s Black Nationalist who claimed that blacks could never win freedom in America and should create their own nation in Africa. It was his father's Garveyite preachings and the rage he was to inherit from life that would later shape the philosophy of Malcolm X. After a tempestuous childhood marked by the death of his father, reportedly at the hands of white vigilantes, and the mental instability of his mother, Malcolm turned to a life of crime. Pimping, drug peddling, and robbery became the norm until February of 1946, when at the age of 20 he was found guilty on a burglary charge and sentenced to 10 years in prison. While in prison, Malcolm's brothers and sisters had begun to follow a strain of Islam known as the Nation of Islam. Wallace D. Muhammad, son of Elijah Muhammad, founder of the Nation of Islam.
The Nation of Islam said that the black man was God. A rebel in the black God family named Yaqub, he got an idea to graft a white race by separating the genes of the black man and taking the brown and grafting it out until it became white. Yeah, diluting until it became white. And the white race was created, we were told, over a period of 600 years on the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea, we were told. Yeah, and they were created, the white man was created for the sole purpose of challenging the black man and making hell for him. Yeah. And the God who conceived that idea and did that was a black man. That bothered me a lot. I never got over it.
Using this story as precedent, the Nation of Islam would later call the so-called inferior white man blue-eyed devils. The religion was created around the Quran by W.D. Farad in the early 20th century, but it is in no way accepted by the Orthodox Islam community.
It was a mythology with some Islam some seasoning of Islam in it.
W.D. Farad taught his philosophy to many, including Elijah Muhammad, who in the early 1930s became leader of the Nation of Islam.
Elijah Muhammad was a reincarnated Muhammad of 14 centuries ago. W.D. Farad was supposed to be Allah, the God who have sent all of the prophets to all of the people. No.
While he was in prison, Malcolm's family struggled to convert him to Elijah Muhammad's version of Islam. Eventually, they succeeded.
Before he was released from prison, he had already been accepted by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to be a minister. That's the first time I've ever heard of an inmate being accepted in the ministry before he was released.
As a minister for the Nation of Islam, Malcolm took the X as his last name, and with it adopted a more militant code of discipline. For the first time in his life, he had a mission, spreading the word of Elijah Muhammad.
They call Mr. Muhammad a black supremacist because he teaches you and me not only that we're as good as the white man, but better than the white man.
Of Elijah Muhammad's relationship with Malcolm, it is said,
they had a very father and son relationship, and they were very, very extremely close.
Without Malcolm, the Nation of Islam would have been nothing, absolutely nothing. He rescued Elijah Muhammad from obscurity.
During his tenure as a minister for the Nation of Islam, he preached, white people are devils. Christianity is an exclusively white religion. Hell was not something in the hereafter, but what blacks were experiencing every day on earth. And a global revolution of black people would conduct a day of slaughter for this sinful white world. Despite Malcolm's scorching anti-Christian rhetoric, he often quoted the Bible in his speeches as a means of converting black Christians to the Nation of Islam. But rather than embracing the Christian gospel for himself, he used the scripture as a tool to promote his own agenda. Benjamin Kareem, Malcolm's assistant minister, explains Malcolm's position on Jesus Christ.
Getting back to Jesus, that he had quite a bit of respect for his courage and he sort of admired him. I guess he saw a reflection of himself in him.
For some time, word had reached Malcolm that Elijah Muhammad had fathered several illegitimate children. He wrote the story off as pure gossip until, while visiting Elijah's home, he came face to face with Muhammad's young secretaries and their illegitimate offspring.
And they were on the porch in a highly emotional state, you know, and all of the little babies that they had with them, all of them looked alike, you know, and he was devastated.
As time wore on, the rift between Malcolm and the leadership of the Nation of Islam continued to deepen. He began knowingly or unknowingly to defy the edicts of Elijah Muhammad.
The ministers got orders from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad not to make any comment on the death or assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Said it's too dangerous, the atmosphere is too sensitive, don't even make a comment. Malcolm didn't obey that. When the news media came to him, he responded with that statement, a case of the chickens coming home to roost. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad then ordered him to be silenced for 90 days. He couldn't stay quiet for 90 days. He broke that too.
Malcolm was a man who wanted to be number one, and Elijah was a man who was determined to remain number one. So the two were bound to clash.
Malcolm's open disregard of Elijah Muhammad's authority and his ever-growing distance from the high-ranking officials in the Nation of Islam blocked Malcolm into a corner, where running and open verbal assault were his only means of survival.
Malcolm knew there was no hope of him ever getting back. So when he accepted that he wouldn't come back, then he made public statements against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
The break was inevitable and would be final, but the full fury of the separation would not become apparent for another year.
With us now is a man who knew Malcolm X firsthand. We talked about the separation. He became Malcolm X's bodyguard. He's a former black Muslim himself. He's from Detroit, Michigan. Please welcome John Davis. John, we're delighted to have you with us on the program today. Thank you very much. Also with us today is the woman whose father picked Malcolm X up when he got out of prison. He also taught Malcolm to drive. She was raised as a black Muslim and currently works as an education consultant. She's from Atlanta, Georgia. Please welcome Gwen Carter. Again, Gwen, delighted to have you with us on the program today. Let me ask you this. How did you come to work with Malcolm? Did you know him before the separation, and why did you join him?
Well, I became a Muslim in '59.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Listen, the system all the time had told me I was nobody. They told me I was somebody. Which one would you believe? And the thing about it, even though I was a Sunni Muslim first, I was in Philadelphia, but all we were doing was making salat. All we were doing was praying 5 times a day. And it seemed like the nation was cleaning up the brethren. And the only negative thing they could say about the nation was that they were ex-drug addicts, ex-pimps, ex-murderers. And I said, well, isn't that the name of the game, to make them ex? You know, what, you want them to keep on being murderers? You know. So I figured, like Spinoza said, a serious illness calls for an extreme cure. I figured, let's get the brothers together and argue theology later.
All right, now, but you were a chemist, and you knew that the theology they were espousing could not possibly be true. Why did you believe that? Why did you go for it?
Because they were doing something. They were making ex-drug addicts. They were doing more than the police department. They were doing more than the government. They were doing more in my community than anybody else was, and I wanted to be a part of that.
Now, when you, Gwen, were growing up in this, what was being taught? What was it like growing up in a family that was into the Muslim life?
Well, there was my mom who was supported, and my father, both as a family. We were surrounded by Muslims who praised our family and encouraged us. Here I am, engulfed in all of this kind of love and community. I felt very comfortable. I thought that this was the life, and that what I heard preached was the truth.
So now, what about the hatred or at least the rhetoric that you heard Malcolm was espousing? Did you hear that at home? Was that taught to you in your homes, or was that just something that he did for public?
Oh, yes. I heard it in the home. As a matter of fact, Malcolm had dinner over at our home when I was small, but he was not Malcolm at that time. He was just Malcolm, just one of the other brothers. the hatred did not seem like hatred. But even as a child coming along, I had a problem with why God would love one group of people more than another, and especially, I think, in terms of the black people. Why would God love us more than he loved white? Didn't he create both? That was a question in my mind, even as a little child. And when I heard for the first time that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that included both blacks, whites, Hispanics, you name it. That's what changed my heart.
Now, you, on the other hand, were quite adamant in believing that Malcolm had the solution, and when he left the Nation of Islam, you went with him.
Well, not chronologically, that didn't really happen. What happened was, in Philadelphia, a lot of things were said in the FOI and in our meetings, and I would say something, and they would say something, and I says, wow, these guys are not even thinking. And after a while, I started having little arguments and debates about theology, and and they called me a rebel because I just couldn't go along with if I don't believe you, man, you got to convince me. So what happened was I left Philadelphia and went back home to New York, and I went back to New York, and then Malcolm left, and he came to New York, and I went with him.
Now, let me ask you this: you were there when Malcolm was assassinated. In fact, you were the chief bodyguard.
No, I wasn't the chief bodyguard. I had just been promoted to lieutenant. We had a captain.
So you were the lieutenant?
I was lieutenant. My job was to post the guards. So after Benjamin got finished speaking, then I changed the guards and brought the guards from the front of the ballroom to the back of the ballroom to debrief them, and we would say, was anybody suspicious, etc. And before I was able to get to that point, they had just come back. I had just faced them. That's when all the stuff broke out.
What happened?
Well,
you say?
Somebody hollering over here, and next thing I heard, Malcolm talking about hold it, cool it, and shooting, and next thing people started jumping chairs like gazelles. Even the so-called bad guards I had, some of them were running. I said, oh my God. And so they came up he was coming up the aisle, one of them, with a gun, and you don't know what it feels like to have a gun pointed at you. It could have been a small one, but it looked like to be this big. And when I understand he fired, and they found a bullet in the back of the Audubon and said it only missed me about 6 feet or so. And then we followed him downstairs. That's Hayer. And he was the one we caught and was beaten up on, as you see in the movie.
We'll talk a little bit more about that because Malcolm went through some extreme changes in his life, but probably the most critical change only was touched on just barely in the movie. But that change took place not too long before his life came to a tragic end. Part 2 of our report explores the man behind the X, Malcolm after Mecca.
Malcolm's feeling of betrayal and his vocal criticism against the Nation of Islam made his alienation from the group binding and more intense than ever before. There would be no turning back now. In April of 1964, after officially breaking from the Nation to spearhead his own international Muslim organization, Muslim Mosque Incorporated, Malcolm made the official Hajj to Mecca, a requirement for all Orthodox Muslims. It was there that he took his new Arabic name, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. Following his departure from Mecca, Malcolm sent a letter to his followers describing his turnabout from a self-described racist or anti-white stance to one of acceptance and brotherhood. He wrote, "The colorblindness of the Muslim world's religious society and the colorblindness of the Muslim world's human society. These two influences had each day been making a greater impact and an increasing persuasion against my previous way of thinking. I knew many would be astounded who had gained during my 12 years with Elijah Muhammad a hate image of Malcolm X. We are truly all the same."
He spoke more on the universal brotherhood of people as opposed to, the white man being the devil as a minister of the Nation of Islam.
Malcolm X biographer Bruce Perry would disagree.
His trip to Mecca is a political ploy which enables him to shift position on the white devil theory, for example, without acknowledging that he had known for years that not every white was a devil.
He had met white Muslims over here in the United States. He didn't have to go there to meet one. In fact, Elijah Muhammad had some white Muslims visiting him in his home. Malcolm was aware of that. But when I said he was fast thinking and his thoughts were rushing, he said, now let me put this together. I'm going to tell the members of the Nation of Islam that the blue-eyed devil was there and in the holy city of Mecca, and Honorable Elijah Muhammad has told us something that's not correct. So he saw something that would help him discredit Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, because he was threatened by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam at that time, seriously threatened.
So I think Malcolm was certainly developing an internationalist perspective. I know when he did come back, two of his famous speeches, one is, if you see a capitalist, you'll see a bloodsucker.
Malcolm, in an effort to attract a larger following, became more inclusive, opening up his speeches to a wider audience. By late 1964, Malcolm needed to pull as many friends as he could to his side.
The Malcolm that he became was a Malcolm desperate. Desperate to prove the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wrong. Desperate to see the Nation of Islam toppled before he was killed.
AIDS said shortly before his assassination, "Why don't we start shooting up Elijah Muhammad's people?" He said, "Brother, you've lost your religion." He said, "Rather than harm any of Elijah's followers, I'd rather die." And I think he really believed that.
On February 21st, 1965, at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, he would stand by his word.
He went in the Audubon, went in the dressing room area, and a man named Benjamin Goodman, whose now name is Benjamin Kareem. Benjamin Goodman's job was to warm up the audience.
The minister wanted me to open up for him. And I tell you something, as I stood there before him, I got a weird feeling.
Benjamin Goodman's job was to see if there were any people that looked suspicious in the audience, and particularly members of the Fruit of Islam of the Manhattan Mosque, because he was had been a member of the Fruit of Islam, and that was a security force, and they thought that if any danger came, it would come from that area. And he saw no one there from the Fruit of Islam. Someone in the back of the room, one of them, would turn to someone and say, "Keep your hand out of my pocket," just as Malcolm started to speak. And then he would throw a smoke bomb. And while everybody was looking backwards, men in the front with a Luger, a shotgun, and a .45 automatic would then rush the stage and fire at Malcolm. First the shotgun, and they emitted 2 blasts.
To me, it sounded like about 4 heavy explosions, very rapidly, went off in front of, right at the wall, I would think, because we thought that bullets or whatever it was coming through the wall. And we hit the floor. And at that moment, I heard this crash on the stage. And that's when I knew what had happened.
Malcolm was a dead man before he hit the floor.
On February 21st, 1965, the changes stopped happening for Malcolm X. What his next metamorphosis might have been will never be known.
Now joining us is author of a book called Malcolm, the Man Behind the X, and we'd like to thank Eyes on the Prize, a PBS documentary, for the use of that Malcolm X footage. Our next guest is the associate pastor of a new fellowship in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He conducts seminars for prisoners, and he's encountered many black inmates who are themselves Muslims. Please welcome Mr. Carl Ellis. Carl, delighted to have you on the program today.
Thank you, Ben.
Let me ask you a question. How significant was Malcolm's trip to Mecca? Was it a political ploy, fancy footwork, or was there something that happened over there that literally changed the way he viewed himself?
Malcolm was a man, first of all, we have to understand that he was a man who was sincerely seeking for truth. He was a man who was not afraid to admit that he was wrong if he was wrong on a certain thing. After his break with Elijah Muhammad, he went over there trying to look for answers about the African-American situation here. He wanted to find out exactly what Islam was all about. And he got over there, and he saw some things that he had never seen before. He had never really realized, I guess. Over the time, he had begun to realize that this racism thing that Elijah Muhammad was putting out was not necessarily the answer.
Now, let me ask you this. How does what the black Muslims teach, the Nation of Islam here teach, how does that differ from what is classical Islam, or is it? Or is there a difference?
Well, yes, there's a difference. First of all, the Nation of Islam taught that the white man was the devil. Now, we have to understand that when you see white racist behavior, when you see the lynchings, and when you are aware of the day-to-day discrimination, degradation, and all these kind of things, people wonder, why do these people act like this? Well, the Bible has an answer for it, but the Christian church was very, very silent on dealing with the issue, and so along came Elijah Muhammad with his mythology, which says, well, the reason that white folks act the way they do is because they're the devil. It answers a lot of questions, etc. Now, in Islam, they don't necessarily teach that. Islam claims to teach the brotherhood of all those who submit to the will of God. But we know that, according to the history, and it's well documented, that in the Islamic world there have been racists, there has been slavery, and all the rest of this. So what we've got to understand is that when Malcolm went over to Mecca, it was kind of like a person who was raised in the segregated South the first time he visits the North. He visits the North for the first time, he says, oh, they don't have racism here, because he would tend to equate racism with Southern segregation.
Now, let me ask you this. W.D. Farad was a white man, and he was the man from whom Elijah Poole, who later became Elijah Muhammad, got his information. How did Elijah Poole take from a white man this concept of black Muslim doctrine?
Well, that's an ironic situation. If you look at the movie Malcolm X, and you see the scenes inside of the home of Elijah Muhammad, you see this portrait of this man up above the mantle, and that's W.D. Farad. Now, he's kind of a mysterious man. Some people feel that he was Turkish, and other people feel that he was something else. But the point was that there was some connection with him between him and a man named Timothy Drew, which later became known as Noble Drew Ali, who started the Moorish American Science Temple. So W.D. Farad then began to set up the Temple of Islam, and then, of course, Elijah Poole, having been a Baptist minister, became very helpful to Farad, and they began to work together on what later became the Nation of Islam.
He wasn't looked on as a white man. He was looked on as a man from the East. Yes. As light comes from the East unto the West. Also, the fact when he says, who is that who comes with dyed garments on from Basra? They use all those scriptures out of the Bible and equated that to W.D. Farad. Not that he was a white man, but that he was an Eastern man from the East of light skin. Okay, and so that's how they were able to.
You had time to talk with Malcolm. I mean, was this political? Was it fancy footwork? Or did something significant happen inside of Malcolm?
I disagree. Just being around Malcolm, I always say Malcolm, to me, was an honorable person. And I make a distinction between being honest and honorable. Most folk are honest because they don't want to get caught. But Malcolm wouldn't steal if he could get away with it. To me, that's an honorable person. And I know that Malcolm believed everything that Elijah Muhammad said. And it wasn't that the fact that he didn't see white Muslims in America, but part of the doctrine was that Mecca was the holy city and the devil was not allowed in the holy city. That's right. Therefore, when he gets to Mecca and sees blonde, blue-eyed Muslims, then he says, wait a minute. The messenger said that they weren't allowed. Right. So if he's wrong on this one, maybe he's wrong on something else. And his idol found out had feet of clay. And so he started looking at other things. It wasn't about not knowing that there were Muslims over here, because you go right on Riverside Drive and 77th Street and you see all the white Muslims you want to see. But they were told that they were not allowed in Mecca. And when he got there and found them in Mecca,
And I think that was the startling thing that opened his eyes. Again, as I go back to my analogy of the kid who visits the North for the first time, he says, oh, there's no racism up here, until he begins to realize that racism is in the North just as much as in the South, right, but it's a different manifestation.
Yeah, because in the South, they had black and white faucets. In the North, they don't have black and white faucets, but they did have black and white.
That's right.
Black and white neighborhoods, black and white schools, right, black and white restaurants.
And it was institutionalized. It was institutionalized in the system, whereas in the South, you knew exactly who was discriminating against you.
Malcolm used to teach that we had the wolves down south and the foxes up south.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And we were the sheep, and both the wolf and the fox like lamb chops.
That's right. Amen. Amen.
What was it that appealed to Malcolm, and what is it that appeals so strongly to prisoners and about the whole concept of the Nation of Islam?
Okay, let me go back to this Mecca thing. When Malcolm was over there, he was able to begin to think things through without being encumbered by the American racist situation, and that's what opened his eyes. Now, the thing I think that appeals to prisoners is that Malcolm represents this manhood thing. And as we know in our society, the black male has been called an endangered species. Well, that's not just true in 1992. That's been true for a long time. If you go back to the history of the Ku Klux Klan and other groups, the black male was the enemy. There have been all kinds of theories put forth about a conspiracy to kill black males. The other thing is that the church, I'm a pastor, I'm an associate pastor, I love the church and all the rest of that, but let's face it, the church in many instances is what I call male unfriendly. Now, I talk to the Muslims on the street selling the papers, and I always ask them, why are you doing this through Islam? Why not be a Christian and do it? And they say things like, the church is too female. The church never answered my questions. The church was never concerned about the things I was concerned about. On and on and on. And I think when we look at the Nation of Islam with its doctrine of dignity and discipline and all those kind of things that appeals to these guys, and they want to be a part of it. And for one, I say, well, who has anything to say against that? What's wrong with self-discipline? What's wrong with being clean-cut? What's wrong with having a sense of self-reliance? Not in the sense that I can earn my salvation with God, but the sense that I can stand on my own 2 feet and make it, and not be on welfare. And those are the good kind of things, and those are the kind of things that we need to connect with these young men who long for that kind of teaching and that kind of
We're going to take a quick
practice.
break, and when we come back, the panel will answer some questions from our studio audience, so we invite you to stay tuned to the special edition of the 700 Club. Unfortunately, we can't take your phone calls, but we will take some questions from our studio audience, great audience, who is with us, and we have that right after this. Stay with us.
A clean, strong image of leadership. And Malcolm fits that bill. He was clean as a hound's tooth in terms of the image he presented once he became a member of the Nation of Islam. He is now, like Dr. King, virtually regarded as a saint. And I just find it a phenomenon. And I feel myself so privileged to have written about this man who is one of the icons in the black experience.
Welcome back as we continue our special program here, a look at Malcolm X in search of the truth. And we have with us a great audience. We have some questions for our panel. And panel, we want to get right to our questions. Our first question has to do with movies, and so we go right to this. Your name, ma'am? Where are you from? What's your question?
My name is Renee Escoffrey Johnson. My question relates to appeal and how some critics have started talking about, well, this is not the documented version and this is more of a Hollywood romanticized version. Do you think that Spike Lee needed to promote more of a romantic version so that he could get the mass appeal and the draw to the movie?
No, to make Malcolm X successful, the romantic appeal, you have to look at the audience and the way Hollywood structures things. I'll give you the perfect example. There was a film called A Rage in Harlem. You might have remembered that. And The Rage in Harlem started out with the whole thing of it's going to be romantic, it's cultural, it's period and everything. It opened, it did a lousy opening weekend. And the funniest thing happened when you looked at the advertisement for A Rage in Harlem. When they first opened up in the advertisement in the newspapers, everybody had their arms around each other and, it was like camaraderie. The second week, everybody had guns in their hands because they were trying to hype up that there's action in here and drama and everything else. So you got to think when you go to the movie theaters and you look at a film, they show you the best clips where there are people jumping over things and explosions going off and that kind of thing. So in terms of promoting the films, I think Spike knew that in order to get people into the theater, he'd have to show some of the more graphic scenes and some of the more dramatic scenes before Malcolm became converted, his whole jitterbug lifestyle in Harlem and those kind of things. So in order to market the movie effectively, it had to come off more action-packed and the appeal had to be a little bit more kinetic.
Also, I feel that a lot of people who are knocking the picture are usually people who didn't live through this situation.
That's right.
And really don't know what they're talking about half the time. And I can tell you, just by looking at it, it awakened a lot of things in me that I actually lived through. I lived through going to the Savoy Ballroom and Uptown Harlem. That's where I was raised. I was Harlem red, Harlem bred, and thought I'd be Harlem dead, you know. But it was real, and recognized that it's theater. It was not a documentary. You wouldn't have gone to see it if it was a documentary.
No, that's right.
Our next question, Sarah, what's your question? Your name and your question, please.
Gregory Mitchell. My question has to do with the interpretation of Allah as thought of by the Muslim as opposed to Christian Jehovah God. When the Prophet Muhammad had his religious experience in the cave at Hyros, I understand that he had taken Allah as one of the Up-God from the Qadish tribe. Allah is never associated as a Trinity, God, Son, the Holy Ghost, as Jehovah God. Is Allah, in fact, the same God that Christians worship?
Carl, you want to jump on that?
Yeah, let me jump on that. Yes, in 60 seconds. The Bible in the New Testament in Greek uses the word theos, and that very same word theos is used of the Greek gods. Allah is just merely an Arabic word which means God, just like we say God. Okay, the Chinese called him Shang-Ti. You know, it just depends. Different people had different names for God. And it's not so much the name that counts, it's the content that we put behind the name. The Old Testament term Baal means Lord, but the reason that God got so upset was because it was a local Lord, it was a tribal Lord, and that's all. So yes, the word Allah was probably used on the day of Pentecost, as people spoke in the languages of the world.
We have another question here. Your question, your name, ma'am, and your question.
My name is Consuela Underwood, and my question is there any proof that there was a collaboration between the U.S. government and the Nation of Islam to kill Malcolm?
And there is also William Kunstler is trying to reopen the trial because he claims that the men that they caught were not really the ones that did it. 2 of them already been paroled.
I don't know about the other 2, but I can tell you Hare was one of them because I was one of the ones who were beating up on him like you saw in the movie. And his face was about that far from my face. He was on the ground, and I was like this. So I know that I testified against him. I even have the little summons from the state court? Grand jury. I have that right in my possession today. And but I do believe that if they had something to do with it, because Malcolm was moving this from a civil rights thing into a human rights thing, and people in the UN of the Third World were quoting Malcolm. Can you imagine being in the UN, you are the American ambassador, and somebody else is quoting somebody from your country, accusing you of genocide, etc., ad infinitum?
My question is directed toward Mr. Davis. Considering the many adversities that African Americans have had to face, as well as tragedies here in America, do you feel that this country owes a great indebtedness towards African Americans, such as restitution or some form of restoration? And if so, how may the government go about this?
My brother, if whether I felt they owed anything, the reality is if they owe, they're not going to pay. That's number one. And so I really don't deal with that. But my whole thing is that you have to wonder, who are we? And you see, the reason why we're in the state we're in, because we don't know our purpose. We do not know the purpose of this black nation within a nation. And God says in his word that I will form me a people who were not a people to show forth my praise. That is our purpose. When you talk about a royal priesthood, when you talk about a peculiar nation, there's nobody more peculiar than we are. And when you talk about people who are to be enslaved in a foreign land for 400 years, you need to know that you were in slavery for 400 years, starting in 1555, and they took the chains off of your mind in 1955, and then Israel wandered through the wilderness for 40 years, and we come up to 1995, and God says, I will judge the nation that did it to you. And why do you think America's going through these changes? Why do you think you have the people on top of America who have no idea of morality? Why is morality going down the tube? Because it's all part of, and not only does America owe a debt to the black man, she owes a debt to the Indian, she owes a debt to the Japanese, Chinese. She didn't drop the bomb on the Germans. The Germans started the war. She didn't drop the bomb on the white Germans. She dropped the bomb on the...
Let me ask you a question here.
Yes, sir.
Now, given that same tack, if you put a white sheet on a guy, he then can use that same rhetoric to say that the gospel is a message that was brought over to, and he can use, and the Bible has been used to justify slavery and that sort of thing. Isn't it time to move out of the various cultural relevances and move into what the real truth is? You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free.
Yes, but the real truth cannot be told until I get rid of these lies that folk are believing. I have to like wipe the slate clean before I can start writing on it the truth. And I must tell the word the way the word is, not the way the word wants to be or you want it to be. I have to tell it the way it is.
But the relationship in Christ transcends and overrides all of our culture. And that's why he said there is neither Jew nor Gentile. You have the relationship with Christ, but we must also understand that our cultures cannot take precedence over the gospel.
That's that vertical relationship. Right. But this horizontal relationship, when he said there was no difference between Jew and Greek, he also said there was no difference between male and female. But yet he still addressed the man and he addressed the woman.
That's true.
Now, you said something
we could get into that. Yes, ma'am.
Right. You said something about slavery long before the white man ever put us in chains. Black people put black people in chains.
Yeah.
Could you address that?
Black Muslims put us in, the Arab Muslims sold us in slavery. Hello. All these brothers running around trying to change their name to Muhammad and Ibn Abdullah, talking about they're casting off the slave master's name, but they wind up taking on the slave maker's name. It was the Arab Muslims that sold you to the white folks.
Mm-hmm. I would like to know how you feel about those young black Muslims as young as 14 years of age that are running around telling other young children about the preachings of Malcolm X when they are really preaching things that they have heard and not what they know. And isn't that leading people false when when you're teaching something about someone else who is supposed to be a role model that you've heard and is not something that you know? Isn't that leading our people back into thinking, wondering about really what has been taught?
When you ask me how do I feel about them, I feel great about them brothers. You know why? Because I have found that God never uses lazy folk. Man, listen, God used Paul, who was persecuting Christians up and down. And the same zeal that they preaching what they're preaching, you teach them the truth, and they'll preach it with the same zeal. We have to make this Bible relevant to people of color. People of color don't seem to find themselves in here. And I can find myself in here all the way. But I didn't find myself in here until my eyes were opened and let me know that I'm in here. I think, too,
whenever you are doing this kind of program, there's always something you don't get to. You never get a chance to cover it all. You always miss something, and someone always says, why didn't you ask that? But the issue here is, what does Malcolm represent? Malcolm speaks of a hunger inside human beings to be recognized and appreciated and identified as human beings. And if that is not forthcoming, if the God of truth is not revealed to them, they will make their own God. And Malcolm was clear evidence that it works for some people. That's all the time we have for tonight.
If you'd like to receive more information, write to the 700 Club, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. In Canada, the 700 Club, Box 700, Scarborough, Ontario. To purchase a video cassette of today's program or other materials offered, call 1-800-289-1777. Views expressed on the 700 Club are not necessarily those of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
The 700 Club presents a major television event, a fascinating examination of the controversy and the truth about Malcolm X. X, in search of the truth, with your host, Ben Kinchlow.
I wear Malcolm X because I am an all-the-way supporter of what he believed in, and, I wish to be a Muslim. Sometimes I want to be a Muslim, sometimes I want to be a Christian. I support everything that he was for, and I'm proud that he was someone I can look back on and say, hey, he was part of my race and everything,
Hello and welcome back as we continue this special 700 Club called X in Search of Truth. We're delighted you could be with us. We have with us as our guest Alfonso Weston, who's a movie producer, John Davis, who is a former bodyguard for Malcolm X, Gwen Carter, who was raised in a Muslim home, and Carl Ellis, who is conversant with the various doctrines of the Muslim theology. And we have with us a great audience, and we have some questions from our audience, and we'll be getting to our questions right now. Let me ask you a question to comment, gentlemen, on that statement that was made by that young man at the very beginning. He said, I am a full supporter of Malcolm X. Sometimes I want to be a Christian. Sometimes I want to be a Muslim.
Yeah.
What accounts for that dichotomy, and is it prevalent?
I think the issue here is theology. When we see the images, we have to understand it's not only theology, but it's images. We have to be careful about the images we project. When you look at Christianity and the way we practice it in America, we project an image of Christianity that is, well, wimpish to say the least. We get the impression, if you listen to what comes across to a lot of African Americans, God sounds like a European tribal deity of some kind. And so here's a young man who's teetering on the brink. He wants to support, he's in agreement with Malcolm X. At the same time, he knows his mother is probably a Christian who prays for him and all that. But at the same time, the church does not project the kind of image that he needs to deal with.
But seeing the kind of discipline that the nation exhibits, growing up in the hood myself, coming from the streets, being a man of the streets, growing up in Chicago, knowing what the nation is about, and knowing the immense respect that young black men have for the nation, what he might want to buy into is the discipline, the inclusiveness, the strength you get as a unit. In the film, when all the Muslims marched on that police station and said, we're not going to leave here until we're satisfied, you want to be a part of that. You get so sick and tired of being victimized, of seeing, cops beat a man senseless and then walk away scot-free, of all the other things that are prevalent in society now that say that you as a human being are not valued, that when somebody comes along and says, you have value, we will give you discipline, you get to wear, sharp suits, because the Muslim brothers are always in their suits with their bow ties, you can't tell them anything, you get to buy into this whole cultural, iconography, and that's something you want to be a part of.
Issues of self-discipline are very important, and we have to address those things. The other thing, as I said, there's plenty of things. For example, you take a guy like Nehemiah in the Bible. My goodness, there's no better example of an African-American who made it big in the system, who came back and did something for the hood.
Exactly.
He empowered the people back home.
Exactly.
He built the walls. He restored their dignity and all the rest of that. And here's Daniel. Here's a minority man sold by his brothers and sisters into Babylonian bondage for a shaky peace. Here he's a minority in the midst of a superpower, and he ends up reaching the whole world with the gospel.
Well, one of my films I did the story of Joseph, and I cast Joseph as a black man.
Perfect.
And it was phenomenal. Because people saw a man that was falsely accused.
That's right.
A man betrayed by his own brothers, his own kind. How many of y'all feel like y'all been betrayed by your own kind from time to time?
Yeah, amen.
You know what I'm saying?
Well.
Watch it.
I know.
Go to preaching there.
But, you've got all of you, who never let go of his dream. When you arm an African American with a dream, it is one of the most powerful tools that you can give a person. But in today's society, so many of our dreams are taken away. Our young people see that they have no future or feel that they have no future, so they'd much rather shoot me or you for our baseball jacket, for our gym shoes, because they can't see beyond the here and now. We need to empower our young people with dreams. And Malcolm, and that's one of the things that appealed to African-American men. He was talking about a future.
Ben is trying to get in there, y'all.
Right. Let me interrupt you. That's good. Good preaching here. But we got some folks in here who came here specifically to get you to preach to them. Your name and your question, ma'am.
Lori McCory. My question is, because of the rift between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad, do members of the Muslim faith today embrace Malcolm X, or is he considered an outcast?
Yeah, to me, it's so funny. That's what I really, when I testified at the grand jury, I asked them, please don't give these brothers the death penalty, because I want them to live to see how they've been tricked. Because the same Temple number 7 is now named after Malcolm. The same one that they want to put him out of now has his name on it. That's the name of it. And to see Malcolm's name to be risen to the place it is, and they have to look and say, we killed him, whoever did it. That to me, I prayed that they wouldn't get the life penalty. To me, that would have been too easy.
Do they? But are they consider Malcolm as an outcast, or do they embrace?
No. Malcolm, essentially, to 90% of them, until you find people like Joseph, who still got a thing, Malcolm's a hero.
Okay. Your name and your question, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Gardner, and I was just wondering about where the women fit in the Muslim faith.
Yeah, yes.
We've been talking about how important it is for the black men, but are the women like second-class individuals, or are they taught how to be good wives? What is the strength of the woman in this?
Well, I think about the way our women are portrayed in Islam. Many of the women wouldn't say themselves that they are second class. They feel like they're supporting their men and that we're backing up our brothers. No, I don't think that the women are second class.
We have a question right here that kind of follows up on some of the things we've been talking about spiritually. Great. And what was your question, ma'am?
Well, my name is Carla Edward, and I believe that the film did glorify God. And I've talked to some diehard Christians, and they have problems going to see the movie, as if, I don't want to deal with Malcolm. He believed in something other than what I believe, and I'm not even interested. It's like they're denying themselves the benefit of searching for the truth. And
that happens. It always has happened. A lot of church members have the old ostrich in the head syndrome. That's right. They stick their head in the sand, and they got nothing but their hind parts left out there, and they're being kicked around, and don't know why they're being kicked around. And just like that young brother who said he's tossing between Islam and Christianity, them same folks, especially the old folk, who are looking in the ground, and they're going to be upset when their young sons and daughters come on and say, Mama, assalamu alaikum, don't give me no more pork, I'm Muslim, and here you are, missionary in the church of what's happening now, and you're going to be so disappointed. And the thing about it, the reason why the brother is going between Christianity and Islam is because Farrakhan and them are addressing the social problem. But what they're saying is, it is not addressing the spiritual need that we have that has been put in us, our spirit, soul, and body, and all they are addressing is the soul man. And if Farrakhan and them could, which they can't, because they do it with the truth, and thy word is truth, Jesus is the truth, that's the only thing that can save them. If they could win the people over through the spirit realm, they would have them, because they are addressing the social problems. And the church is overlooking so many things. And as you said, I don't want to see that, because Malcolm was a hate teacher and all that foolishness. They believe what the media said. And the media, if they wanted to, could make you hate your mama.
That's right.
Now, let me address
another question. Your name and your question, please.
My name is Karen Givner, and I have a question. I'd like to know, do you have any suggestions for Muslims converting to Christianity?
Got a ton of them. Yes. Well, one thing we know, and don't be offended if you happen to belong to this denomination, but there's a lot of Muslims who leave Mount Zion Baptist Church. That's a generic term, if you understand what I'm talking about. Every black community has a Mount Zion Baptist Church. There's a lot of Muslims. That's right, and New Mount Zion, and Greater Mount Zion. So they leave Mount Zion Baptist Church and join the masjid. Okay, now because this is the thing, the brothers, this is where it's at. They're doing something in the community, etc., etc. Now, what's happening is that there's a lot of Muslims, and I talk to them all the time. They are teetering on the brink. They are on the verge of disillusionment, but they don't know where to go. They're caught up in this works righteousness thing. They're trying to earn their salvation. They're trying to earn their righteousness. They don't have the power to do so. They're wondering what's going wrong, but they're teetering on the brink. They don't quite know what to do. They don't know where this is ending up. Now, it is not realistic to ask them to go back to Mount Zion Baptist Church that they left in the first place, that where they couldn't be men, where their questions weren't answered, where there was no real concern for the issues of social justice and those kind of things. What are we going to do? I think the thing that we need to do right now is to create a safety net, a new kind of church, a new model of the church that will be the safety net for these guys to when they let go, we can say, okay, you're here. We got a new kind of a church. And we need, in essence, we need another reformation. And I don't think that's too far-fetched. We need a church that emerges that is as different from what we've got now as Protestantism was from Catholicism. We need a new kind of a church.
Let me interrupt, but that's a great concept, But how are you going to make that happen in practical reality?
Well,
I mean, these guys are dying now. They're saying, make it real today.
What we need to do, we need to begin to do study groups. Begin to look into the Scriptures. See what the Scripture says about racism. And it says a whole lot about that. See what the Scripture says about justice. It says a whole lot about community development. I go around this country and I lecture on various campuses. And, for example, I was at Buffalo State College just 6 months ago. And I did a lecture on community development and etc. And there were a lot of Muslims there, and they mobbed me. They said, man, where do you get that stuff from? We never heard any of that stuff when we were in church. And if we began to have study groups, begin to teach the Scripture as it was meant to do, to share notes, we can, from those would emerge new models of the church. We don't have to have it. It doesn't have to be cataloged.
We have your name and your question, ma'am.
My name is Roz Caldwell. My question is regarding one of the clips there. When Malcolm was killed, it said we would never know what the further metamorphosis of Malcolm X would have been. And you having been with Malcolm X, Pastor Davis, what do you think? It's speculation, but what do you think?
Oh, boy, what I think. I sat there again. Malcolm was a searcher for truth, and whatever truth he found, he walked in it. And whether I get 2,000 letters, if you're going to send it to the letter, send it to P.O. Box 21907, Detroit, Michigan. I sincerely believe, I sat there in the movie and I watched the birth and death of Malcolm Little, the birth and death of Malcolm X, the birth and death of Malik al-Shabazz, and I believe deep in my heart that if he'd have lived long enough and somebody had presented the gospel like it should have been, he would have been Pastor Malcolm. I sincerely believe that.
On that note, we'll take a break. We'll come back. We've got more questions about the father, the family, and more questions about the women as we continue this special Malcolm X in Search of the Truth. Stay where you are.
Now, you may be shocked by these words, but I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and prayed to the same God with fellow Muslims whose eyes were blue, whose hair was blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And we were all brothers. The American Negro can never be blamed for his racial animosities. He's only reacting to 400 years of oppression and discrimination. But as racism leads America up the suicidal path, I do believe that the younger generation will see the handwriting on the wall, and many of them will want to turn to the spiritual path of the truth. The only way left in this world to ward off the disaster that racism must surely lead to.
We're back. Your name, sir, and your question.
My name is Michael Krasta, and my question is this. The panel has been talking about Christianity not appealing to the black male, and a couple of you said that it needs to do so in order to gain more followers. Also, someone said that if Malcolm X had heard the gospel, his life might have changed. Malcolm X met Dr. King. Dr. King was a Christian. Where does Dr. Martin Luther King fit in this discussion?
Dr. King had a different perspective on the whole struggle for freedom in America. Dr. King came from the South. He had a Southern perspective. His whole nonviolent strategy was a Southern strategy, etc. And at the time, I think Malcolm had this disagreement with Dr. King in terms of ideology. And so at the time, it wasn't so much in that kind of a context. I think if someone had really communicated the gospel to Malcolm on terms that he would understand, which Jesus did quite often, by the way, he told these parables, if somebody had really been able to communicate to Malcolm at the time he was going through all those changes, I think he would have, I agree 100% with the statement, I think that he would have definitely become a Christian. He was on his way to the kingdom.
I thank goodness that there was a Malcolm and a Dr. King together.
Yeah.
I'm very glad that they both existed in the same time.
That's right.
Because whether we would like to admit it or not, it was kind of like the classic case of good cop, bad cop. Because it was like, okay, now, we can deal with Malcolm, we can deal with Martin.
Which one?
Malcolm, Martin. Let me see. Malcolm said, you put your hand on me, you won't put your hand on nobody else. Martin says, well, let's sit down, talk it out, we'll be nonviolent. I think I'll talk with Martin, you see. Yeah. So thank goodness that they both existed at the same time because they were necessary.
And not only that, to answer his question, Martin wasn't preaching Jesus. Martin was preaching nonviolence at that time when Malcolm. I don't follow a cultural Jesus. I don't follow an institutional Jesus. I follow a life-changing Jesus. Right. And you got to know who he is.
Your name and your question, sir.
My name is Paul Hurst, and I'm a little concerned about the movie for two reasons. One, because the issue of the devil being white or the devil being black, I think is wrong, because I think the devil is a spirit, and we war not with flesh and blood. And I'd like you to address that question. The second question I'm really concerned about is the young men that I see viewing this movie in the inner city, in the ghetto, are young men who are without a father. And that, to me, is the real crux of identity. It's not an identity of being a black Muslim, of gaining a black identity or any identity, because God says we've got to die to self and we've got to find our identity in Christ. I'm not saying we don't need to be proud of who we are and what our heritage is, but my concern is, where is the father? Where's the family? Because that's the only way that the black family, the black community is ever going to get back on its feet.
It is time to get back to the extended family. Exactly. Do we remember the times when, and I grew up in this period, born in 1960, when I grew up on the south side of Chicago, if my neighbor that knew my mama caught me doing something wrong, she would whip me, then take me to my mama, and my mama would whip me, worse than my neighbor's mama did. See, but now you can't do that. You put your hand on another woman's child. Don't you hit my baby. You see, it is time to get back to the extended family, and the true change in the black community has got to come from the church. It has got to come from the black church reaching out and embracing the community that it's in. I find it hard to believe that we've got 3 or 4 storefront churches on one block and the community isn't affected.
That's right.
That's right. We are so busy having a Sunday morning social club talking about whose suit looks better or who's got the new Cadillac or who's doing this, that we're not being effective in the community. This greatly concerns me. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know that the black church collectively annually controls $1.7 billion in wealth? Collectively. You put all the money that the black church collects and takes from the community and what have you, it's $1.7 billion. With that kind of money, we can harness it and we can make changes. But we're too busy fighting each other. We can't get together as a coalition. Oh, I ain't going to come to the meeting of the pastors unless I'm known as Reverend Johnson, Dr. Bishop Jones Williams. You know?
Alfonso.
And the time for that is past.
Alfonso, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And as I look at our society now, the evangelical church, and no offense to the evangelical church, we're overlooking what the real problem is. Yes, we're addressing all of the other social issues out there. Therefore, you got a lot of black people who are turning toward Islam because Islam is addressing the social problem. Absolutely. We're out getting jobs for the brothers, for the fathers, if you will.
Closing down crack houses.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now let's not knock Islam altogether, or the black Islam altogether, because they are addressing some things that are necessary for our society. And I think we, the black church, can learn from what's happening, and then we.
Go on.
Okay.
Please, go on.
These fellas, I have to try to get a word in edgewise. But I think the black church, we need to rise up. Now is our time. Let's take advantage of what has happened with Malcolm, and now step in and try to address the needs of our nation.
What we really need to do, and what you're saying is absolutely true. But what we need to do is get back in touch with our own history. How many of you know what the Free African Society was all about? Have you ever heard of the brothers and sisters of Esther? Have you ever heard of the builders of the walls of Jerusalem? Have you ever heard of people like Alexander Crummell? Reverend Holly, several others. Have you ever heard of these people?
No, they're not going to be in our history books, are they?
Let me say this. Let me say this. Time is running out.
But these are things. Right. The Free African Society are mutual aid societies. We used to do the same kind of things, but we lost it.
We lost it. But what I want to say this today is that, like the brother was talking about, the Bible says first the physical, then the natural. The first the natural, then the spiritual. Right. I right now in the Renaissance Christian Center, my church, I'm not fighting Muslims per se, because there's enough drug addicts, there's enough people lost out in the street that I can bring in, and I don't teach them about history, I don't teach them about anything. First of all, I show them how they can clean up. That's okay? Right. And I have faith in the faithfulness of God, okay? And when I start telling them who they are as it relates to this Bible and to Jesus Christ, they start listening. They really do.
That's right.
And we have to know that the word itself is alive, and it's life-giving, it's quickening, it wakes the word. You got to have faith in the word of God that it will accomplish the way I send it. And when I do that, then I start teaching them the history. That molds them, that keeps them in, and that makes them bring other people in.
Yeah, the only
And that's
point
exactly
that
what Islam is doing.
Right. The only point that I was making is that those are the kind of things that the black church used to do.
And
when we quit doing that,
take a break.
Okay, we're going to take a break.
We're going to try to get our panel excited, but we'll be back right after this, so stay right where you are. I said, brothers and sisters, and we're back as we continue our special Malcolm X in Search of Truth. Sir, your name and your question for our panel.
My name is Terry Jefferson, and my question is directed to Pastor Davis. I'd like to know what was Malcolm's primary goal for the OAAU.
The primary goal for the OAAU was to welcome all the people in who were concerned about the struggle, whether they were Muslim or not, Baptist, Methodist, or whatever. Any black man that want to work for the betterment of the black society, that's what the OAAU was about. If you were Muslim, you were encouraged to be in the Muslim Mosque Incorporated.
And the OAAU, by the way, it was the Organization of
African American Unity, and we tried to pattern it after the OAU, which is the Organization of African Unity.
We have a gentleman here who wants a question for Alfonso Wesson. Your name and your question, sir.
Yes, my name is Jerry Rogers. Back in the 70s, we went through a rash of, agonizingly, we went through a rash of black exploitated films, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the Shaft series and all that. We've come a long way since then, but it seemed like every time Spike Lee, during the making of this film, he would come in the red with some money, or it'd be over budget, and it made national headlines and everything. Was that the fear of Spike Lee being not singing to a different, a drummer or a different tune, or is it just that we've come a long ways and maybe the Hollywood elite is afraid of us?
I think the latter is the answer. If Spike Lee, it's funny, somebody said, thank goodness Spike Lee is black, because what would we do with 2 Oliver Stones? Okay? If Oliver Stone had wanted to do Malcolm X, like he'd want to do JFK, he would have been given the $30 and $40 million easily. Like, before he could say, I want to do Malcolm, before he get the X out his mouth, the money would be on the table. But because of Spike's reputation, and he's always called a spade, as it were, and says there is racism inherent in the system, then he was denied access to the funds. But isn't it wonderful that he could go to Bill Cosby and Oprah Winfrey and Magic Johnson and say,
you got a question? So your name, your question.
Yes, my name is Darren Mahaffey, and my question is concerning Allah and Jehovah. It was mentioned earlier that the name means God. As a Christian, I need to understand, is Allah the same God that I serve Jehovah God? What is the difference between the two?
The name and the reality behind the name are two different things. It depends on what I mean by God. I can say God. I can be in the New Age movement and say God bless you, and it has nothing to do with the God of the Scripture. It depends on what you think about and what's behind the name. That's all.
In the Arabic language, Allah means the one God.
That's right.
So it depends on whether Arab is saying it or if you're saying it. If you're saying it, you're saying that's not the God I serve.
That's right.
But since there's only one God,
there's only one God.
There's only one God.
Right. So just be safe and call in the name of Jesus.
As we come to the conclusion of this program, it's been a tremendous program. We thank you all very much for coming. We've had a tremendous audience. We've had a tremendous panel. How about a big round of applause for our panel? You guys have been spectacular. Thank you very much. Boils down to the key issue, Malcolm X in search of the truth. Malcolm was a man in search of the truth. We've talked about who God is and who God might be and whether his name is the same. The issue is not who God is, but how you get to God. And Jesus Christ said there's only one way to get to God the Father, and that's through him. He is the way, the truth, and the life. Thank you for joining us on Malcolm X in Search of the Truth.